Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Fred Pitsadney. I'm the founder and president of Focus Management, and I'll be presenting today's webinar along with Richard Jarofsky, who is a partner at Focus. First of all, a very special thank you to those of you who were on vacation. I know there's at least 3 or 4 of you who have decided to take the time and join us this morning, so we really appreciate that. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, feel free to take notes. I know lots of you are note takers, but just know that we're going to record today's session and we'll send that recording out to you sometimes later this week. All right, and then secondly, we will be using the Q&A feature, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. So please enter any kind of questions that you might have during the session, and then we'll answer those during the Q&A session at the very end. Okay, so look, 6 months ago, the tone and the subject matter for this webinar would have been so different. The focus would have been on planning how to successfully scale the next peak off in the distance there, which represent the goals for the organization. But then, with little warning, everything changed. In the space of a very few short months, the COVID outbreak turned our world literally upside down. Our choices, our options have become severely limited. Now we all need to act very quickly and very decisively and respond to changes that come at us just about every day as we move towards a new normal, whatever that becomes. To survive and thrive in today's unsettling and turbulent environment, we all need to rethink how we approach planning, managing, and executing our critical priorities. We need to take the tools that we are already familiar with and reshape them to fit the world that we now find ourselves in. And how has that world changed? Well, for starters, it kind of shut down. Planes stopped flying. Borders were closed. People returning home from abroad were either placed in quarantine or voluntarily into self-isolation. You couldn't go where you wanted to. If you did, you couldn't get back. Buyers couldn't buy. Sellers couldn't sell. Shippers couldn't ship. Makers couldn't make. Every economy everywhere took a severe blow to the head. And on top of all of this, we don't know what's coming next. Is there a second wave? Is this still the first one? Will there be a vaccine? What about an antiviral? When will it be safe to go back to something we used to call normal, whatever that is? This pandemic is crushing many paradigms. How we make purchases and what we buy, how we do business and who we do it with, how our businesses operate internally, how we communicate to each other, and the list goes on. In the face of this, we need to recognize an important reality. Whoever acts fastest and most decisively will set the pace. And to do this, we need to rethink our approach to planning. In fact, to a large degree, we need to rethink how we think, and especially how we think about planning. I'd like to review a couple of things in terms of what our goals are today. First of all, I want to position RAD as our response on how to manage low warning, high impact situations that are continually changing and continue with uncertainty. We're going to review some of the design thinking and the principles to gain your confidence in RAD and in Focus, and hopefully generate some post-webinar interest in RAD. Okay, to start with, where did RAD come from? And what's the fundamental value proposition for our work? We're going to cover that. We're also going to cover off the 4 principles that form the foundation of RAD. We're going to talk about the how-tos, or the tools and techniques that we use, and then we'll wrap it up with the RAD value proposition. Okay, first of all, every leader whether it's of a total business unit or a team, wants the great execution of what matters most. I've met a leader yet that doesn't want that. And yet the great execution remains elusive, as most, in fact, as it's been published, 75% struggle with the execution of not only strategic plans, but operational plans and project plans. So where do organizations end up? Well, perhaps in one of these quadrants. Let's start with that orange quadrant up in the left-hand corner. The poor execution of what matters most. This is where you find leaders who will, with great frustration, who keep asking, you're probably one of them, why are we late? Why have we missed the timelines again? Why are there so many errors? Why are the costs still overrun? Why? Well, you get the idea. You've been there. The green quadrant, the great execution of the wrong things, often leads to major embarrassment as leaders need to answer questions like that boards are asking, owners are asking, questions that sound like this. If we are so great at getting things done, why is the competition still eating our lunch? Or why did we miss our funding raising goal? Or again, I mean, you get the idea. You've heard those embarrassing questions. The black zone is black for a reason. Leaders in the organization don't last very long. It's probably the main cause of why 90% of startups never see year 2. There are 3 elements that help leaders take their teams to the top. Right-hand quadrant. I mean, first of all, we need clarity, we need alignment, and we need commitment to action. Well, of what exactly? Well, first of all, for strategy execution, it's all about clarity of the long-term focus and direction. Today, it's about identifying the critical priorities. What do we need to do to survive? And for some organizations, manage big demands for our services and our products. The bottom axis is about ensuring clarity and alignment and commitment to action for individual accountabilities. We've learned a long time ago, as we facilitate teams, that the we are going to do this, the strat plan, the operational plan, turns into I. So this is about making sure that individuals are very clear on their accountabilities. Not being clear and enabled to take actions or make decisions is, according to published studies and our combined 50 years of experience working with 400 different organizations, the #1 blockage to great execution. The #1 blockage to great execution. We'll be addressing how to fix that during this webinar. Okay, so if you take the great execution of what matters most, GEM is our acronym, and you combine that with the speed and the agility that you need for today's situation, you end up with RAD, Rapid Agile Deployment. And we're going to spend some time talking about exactly how that works. We're going to spend the next 30 minutes or so going through 4 principles. We'll also talk about some specific techniques and tools. Let's start off, first of all, with the principles. First of all, engage your people in the process of planning and deploying your plan, and do it early. We've heard a lot of talk about employee engagement over the last few years, and they're mostly empty words, as in our experience, as most organizations are not really doing a better job at it than they were at the turn of the century. Not when it comes to real, meaningful engagement. Quickly means quickly, not weeks or months, as we're used to when doing strat planning, days. Power through the execution by doing a very few critical processes right, and do them over and over again. Planning sessions should be short bursts, 1 to 2 hours long, not 1 to 2 days as we're accustomed to, as I said, in strat planning. I'm sure everyone has heard the saying that no plan survives the first engagement with the enemy, or variations on that theme. Well, it's more than a truism. A plan that fails to address the rapidly changing realities on the ground is worse than useless, it's downright dangerous. Agility and responsiveness will rule. The fourth and final principle, nothing stops a great plan achieving the success it deserves more than the people charged with its execution having only a vague idea of the authority that they have to make decisions and to get important stuff done. We're going to talk about how to fix that today. So those are the 4 principles. Let's dig into each one of them and put some meat on the bones. There are 2 really important reasons to ask your people on their views and their ideas. First of all, they want to be asked. They want to feel like someone actually cares about what they think. And the second thing is that they know things that you don't necessarily know, right? They may not be smarter, but they're often closer to the action with customers, with suppliers, and competitors. Look, the last thing you want to hear during a debrief, especially of a failed initiative, is, "I could have told you that." You never want to hear those words. It only makes sense that if you ask questions, you need to listen to the answers. Nothing turns people off more than taking the trouble to respond to a question or inquiry only to be totally ignored. We've all been there. That must not happen. It's critical to respond in some fashion throughout the entire process. Ask people early enough in the process to make their input useful. This is during the assessment stage, prior to putting pen to paper and creating the plan to take the business forward. This should be one of the very, very first things that you do. And there are a lot of tools, many available at low cost, that can be used to gather input. And SurveyMonkey is one of is one, and there are others. Keep it simple, make it clear as to why the answers are important. And I'll show you actually a couple examples of how to do that in just a minute. Whatever information you gather, it needs to feed into what we call your battle planning. So why do we call it battle planning? Because for us, it represents a different total level of intensity, right? This is about winning the war. This is not about winning the war. It's about achieving the success we need today that creates a secure and positive tomorrow. The first thing we need to do is quickly come to grips with the situation in which we find ourselves, particularly in 5 areas of importance. First of all, what is life like today for our customers? How are they being affected? What new challenges are they having that might represent opportunities for us? Maybe their need for what we do has decreased or increased in the present situation. For instance, the dramatic drop in commercial and civil aviation has had a serious negative effect on companies that service and repair aircraft components such as wheels and brakes. Sailmakers, on the other hand, who have the capability, have gained from the surge in demand for covers to protect engines as aircraft sit idle. What about our suppliers? We depend on them to operate our business. So how are they holding up? Do we need to be looking for alternatives? We can't afford to have a supply chain that is unreliable due to capacity constraints. As borders close, many experience logistical nightmares and have been able to establish a secure supply of materials and components. As for our competitors, are they showing any signs of weaknesses that we can exploit? Have their service levels dropped significantly? Are they losing customers? Is there a fire sale opportunity out there? Maybe we can snap up some smaller companies that are struggling, and so that we can expand our reach. If we don't, someone else might. How are our people doing? This has been a very stressful time for many, perhaps everyone. Are we doing what we can to help them through this? For example, can we shift hours to help those who are having difficulty managing childcare? For those of us that are already grandparents, we kind of forget about the challenge that puts on young families. Finally, we need to appraise our operational capability and capacity. Are we able to meet service level requirements and remain cost efficient? If we have excess capacity, can it be redeployed to other areas? As an example, look at the number of companies today now making respirators and masks. Okay, remember the survey that I mentioned a few minutes ago? Well, here are the kinds of questions that we ask and how we ask them. First of all, we zero in on what's the one thing, first of all, within our power. There's no use asking questions that we can't implement. So what's the one thing that we could do to help help you and others deal with and cope better, right? For a couple of dimensions, to significantly improve our ability to serve our customers and solve their biggest, most pressing problems, to improve our operational capability, and to outperform our competitors and win more business in the future. So you can see, pretty simple, pretty tight, pretty focused around some key specific questions. The answers you receive need to be sorted, sifted, collated, organized, and analyzed. And look for the nuggets, especially those that might at first glance seem sort of off the page. Include these nuggets in the conversations you have with the core planning team. Set a very small number of objectives whose achievement will make a significant impact on the business. Richard and I have been doing this stuff for 25 years. And one of the common errors we see management teams do in strategic planning sessions, in operational planning, is create these long lists. They almost become wish lists. Really tighten down your focus to those very, very critical. You know, something like this. Here's an example of a pretty tightly focused objective. Increase full order on-time shipment rate to 96% by December the 31st without increasing per unit shipping cost. I mean, this not only drives internal efficiency, it also benefits the customer. It's a win-win. Next is do it quickly. Lean towards action rather than that deep contemplation that sometimes we get into. Make your sessions short, like 1 to 2 hour bursts, right? And place them in tight time deadlines, whatever you can accommodate. Think about doing 2 or even 3 sessions in a week during the assessment and planning stages. The next idea is to keep it simple. This should be one of your mantras during the entire process. You know, a beautiful plan on paper breaks down if people aren't clear on what they need to do and how the various elements need to fit together in order to be successful. In a moment, we're going to show you a very simply a powerful way of ensuring that kind of clarity for your plan. The most common, as we've already said, cause of execution failure is that people don't know what is expected of them, what they're supposed to do, or the authority that is available to them. We're going to talk more about how to get authority crystal clear. Right now, Richard's going to talk to you about some battle planning.
Morning, everyone. Fred has given you some of the background and the overview of RAD and its origins, where it comes from, and in particular, the focus around great execution of what matters most. What I want to do in the next several minutes is give you a little more view under, if you will, under the hood, a little bit of the how we go about doing it, both in terms of what RAD looks like kind of from end to end, but also some of the tools that we use along the way. So the first stage of battle planning, first stage of RAD, is something we call getting ready. Essentially, that is getting things lined up in preparation for the planning activity that we're going to do. And here there are 4 major activities. One of those is to figure out who's going to be the core planning team. You know, is this the leadership team? Is this some diagonal slice, vertical slice? Who needs to be, in quotes, at least in the room and engaged most directly in the process? Second piece then says, who are we going to survey? Whose input are we going to go for? And you know, this could extend all the way from a few key people all the way through to everyone in the organization. Then we distribute, we compile, and we analyze the survey results, because again, the whole point of it is to get some input, to get some information. So that needs to be brought together, as Fred said, sort of sifted, collated, and organized and analyzed, and then fed back to the core planning team in preparation for their activity. And then the final thing we do is to prepare and distribute the assessment pre-work. So this is in order for the core planning team to be well prepared to engage the RAD process directly. This is about 5 days of activity. And typically we do this 1 week prior to the initiation. So that takes us now to really where we initiate the planning process, which is about assessment. And there are 3 major activities that we do here. First of those is a work session that focuses particularly on customers, on suppliers, and on competitors. If you're thinking about in terms of a SWOT, you know, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, which would be a typical part of a comprehensive planning process, this is the external view to begin with. And as Fred said earlier, it's really about understanding what's going on with our customers. How are our suppliers doing? Because we may need to be thinking about changing our supply lines, going to alternate suppliers, or doing things logistically even that are going to enable us to be successful. And likewise, what's going on with our competitors? How are they doing? The second work session then looks at people and operations. So it says, essentially, how are our people doing? What are the sort of pain points and pressures that they're feeling? And operationally, as Fred said, you know, are we able to keep up? Have we got capacity that we can redeploy? What's going on operationally that we need to really understand well? Out of all of that comes the third work session, which is what are the critical few priorities? You know, when we looked at the GEM model a couple of minutes ago, this used to be about sort of long-term strategic focus and direction. Within the context of RAD in today's environment, it's much more short-term. It says, what are the really critical few things that need to drive us? This is days 1 to 5. So if you thought about it as, well, we start on the Monday, essentially by the Friday, we've completed the assessment activity in a series of short meetings. At this point now, we've got our finger on the pulse. We have a good sense of what's going on, and we know it really should drive our conversation in order that it's really focused, it's tight and efficient and productive, and it's going to yield a result that's going to be really useful to us. Well, all of that then feeds into the planning process, which again, you know, RAD, Rapid Agile Deployment, Rapid and Agile is about the speed with which we do things, including the speed with which we do the planning within it. So there are 3 major activities here. The first is to say, well, what are our near horizon objectives? What looks like success for us over the next 3 months, maybe over the next 6 months? This is not a 2, 3, 5-year planning exercise. This is about pulling the organization forward and understanding what that needs to look like. And then secondly, saying, okay, well, if those are our objectives, then what do we need to do in order to get us there? There needs to be work done. There needs to, you know, stuff needs to happen. Important stuff needs to happen. So we need to take a long list of possibilities, work it down to a short list, and figure out for each of those things, who's going to carry the ball? Who's going to be taking accountability for making those things happen? And then finally, work session number 6, which focuses on resources and authority. It says, if I have ownership of an initiative, I need to be really clear on 2 things. One is, well, actually 3 things. One is, what are the expectations of what I'm going to accomplish? But in order to do that, what are the resource requirements that I have? And what kind of authority do I need to have in place to ensure that I can be efficient and effective? And this is days 8 to 15. So essentially, you could think of this as the 2nd week of activity within RAD. At this point, we've got a plan. We've got some clear measures of success. We've got objectives. The ownership is established, and we've also defined authority pretty clearly. So that's kind of an overview of RAD in terms of getting ready, the planning stage, the assessment, and then the planning stage. What I want to do now is talk a little bit about some of the tools and techniques that we use within RAD. And I want to go back to something that Fred said a few minutes ago, which is lean toward action rather than deep contemplation. RAD is not about a lot of reflection and, quote, top of the mountain sort of thinking. It is about moving quickly through the process and making the best decisions that we can, sometimes without complete information. In fact, these days, often without complete information. The first thing that I want to talk about is what we call the 3W chart. And some of you will be familiar with this. So this is a way of simply capturing what needs to happen, what needs to get done. That's the what column. Who needs to do it? It is an individual who is accountable for that action. And sometimes the outcome of a conversation is that, well, it's really Jamie and Chris. So then it's a question of saying, okay, but who has ultimate accountability? Who gets the star next to their name because they are really taking accountability for it, even though it is a joint effort? And then finally, what's the time by which we expect that to be completed? Well, that's a pretty basic and simple form. And sometimes we say, okay, well, I need more information. So for instance, we can also capture the resources that are required in order to get that done. Now, once this is complete, we can take the whole thing, put it into a project management application if we were looking for that sort of level of sophistication, or the simple approach, which would be to just move all of it into an Excel spreadsheet, because then we can sift and sort and we can look at things different ways, do charts and graphics and stuff like that to our heart's content, essentially. But that's the basics in terms of the 3W chart. It's another useful tool within RAD. We use it, in fact, generally within meetings that we facilitate with our clients, but particularly within RAD, we find that there are certain rules of engagement, we call them. You might call them ground rules, rules of order, or do's and don'ts for meetings and things like that. And I think it's a question of what terminology fits best within the organization, within your culture and way of looking at things. But these are about how do you manage the dynamics of that group of people, that core planning team, over the course of a RAD project. First of those is make your point and quickly. RAD meetings are not about long conversations. In fact, by design, RAD meetings are intended to be somewhere between an hour and a half and perhaps 2 hours in length. And sometimes the agenda is fairly aggressive. So it is important that people speak briefly, including the team leader, right? And sometimes managing ourselves is the most difficult part of being efficient and productive. Close is good enough for now. It's about not trying to science things down to the 4th decimal point, but being prepared to say, you know what, it's pretty close. And so let's go with it rather than agonizing over it and spending a whole lot of time that we really don't have to spend at that point. Keeping focused, no sidetracking. It's so easy to get distracted. Using things like a parking lot to capture stuff that, might be important or not. At this point, we can't tell. And what we can tell is that it's not germane to the subject we're talking about. So let's put it on the parking lot. Having one speaker, and when meetings are being done online, this is really, really important because it's just so easy for it to just sort of devolve into a bunch of noise and people not being able to hear each other, listen to each other, and follow the flow of the conversation. So when these meetings are being done online, as we're often doing them these days, I think that particular rule is a really, really critical one. And then finally, the 80% rule. And the 80% rule is a little bit like number 2, close being good enough. And it says that every conversation comes to a point of diminishing return. And you say, you know what, I'm pretty sure that we've talked about this long enough. I think all the important points have been brought out. So in my belief, we're 80% there. And can we now move to making a decision? Or in fact, maybe the decision has become obvious, but we can't we can't let go of the conversation. So let's just stop it, record the decision, and move on. This is another technique, and it ties back to some of the rules of engagement I just talked about that we call Spitball decision making. And if you're familiar with Spitball, actually it has one definition in baseball, which is an illegal pitch that involves using various fluids on the fingers in order to make the ball do very strange things. That's not the definition we're using here. The definition we're using here is, it's kind of like, let's throw things against the wall and see what sticks. as opposed to getting into very long, deep, contemplative conversations about what to do and how to do it. So whatever the objective might be, there are always going to be a number of possibilities. There are 10 things that we could do in order to accomplish that objective. Well, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the time, we don't have the energy, we don't have the anything in order to do all of them. And quite honestly, some of them might even conflict with each other, so it would be crazy to try to do them. Well, then how do we choose? Well, we use this, or where we, within RAD, we use this sort of thinking process, and it's portrayed here as a model that says, you know, there are sort of 4 ways to look at alternatives, to look at options. And we can do it on the basis of, for instance, value versus cost. That's a pretty simple one, and I think it's one that we're all pretty familiar with. Well, there are things that have low cost and effort and high value or benefit, and you'd say, that sounds like a really good deal. Like, I don't know why we wouldn't do that. We've got things that have maybe high cost and effort, but also high value or benefit. And you say, ooh, you know, I think it's justifiable. Maybe it would make sense, especially if we didn't have much in the green. All right, so maybe we're down to looking into the blue. We've got things in the yellow, the why bother zone, that you'd say, well, it's low cost, but it's also low return. So I'm not sure why we would bother. And then finally, we have the no way zone that says, if we're going to spend a lot to do it and not get much back, there's just no way we would bother. And of course, in the middle, they've got that gray sort of maybe zone. So this is really about getting a sense, you know, whether you can plot them this way or not, but getting a sense of where do these things fall. You know, we have a client, in fact, who used this. They did some brainstorming. I think they came up with something like 130 possibilities. And they used Spitball to do a quick first cut, work the list way down. And they took the ones they felt were keepers at that point. And I think the conclusion they reached was, we still can't do all of that. So now let's take those and do another round to work it down to the things that, in fact, we all believe are the right things to do. Right? And at some point, that becomes obvious enough to us that we say, okay, we're going to do that, and we're not going to do those other things. The third principle now, so we've talked about 2 principles already, and as Fred said at the beginning, there are 4 of them to cover. The third of those is about keeping agile and responsive. So a couple of points to make here. One of those is that agility requires a short feedback cycle. I can't be agile if I don't know how things are going. I don't know whether what I'm doing is helping, hurting, or really not making a difference at all. So this idea of checking on progress often is really, really critical. And in fact, within RAD, our belief and our standard is that there are check-ins within a week, a couple of them, and a more robust, if you will, and extensive checkpoint that's done every couple of weeks. And this is really about making sure that we're aware of what's going on, and if necessary, changing the plan. You know, if it's not the right stuff, for goodness sake, we need to stop doing it or change how we're doing it and ensure that we're getting the results that we're after. And sometimes it comes down to something that we call calling an audible. And if you're familiar with North American football, an audible is when, you know, the quarterback, let's say, calls a play in the huddle, and they all go to the line of scrimmage, and the quarterback looks around and sees how the defense is aligned and comes to the conclusion pretty quickly, that play's not going to work. So I'm going to call an audible. I'm going to give a signal to everybody on the field of the new play that we're going to run. And the most important thing in an organization is that when you call an audible, call it loudly, call it clearly, because if people don't hear it or don't understand it, then the wrong things are going to happen.
Okay, we're going to talk about the 4th principle now, which is to delegate authority. I said earlier that I'd come back to the subject of authority and the need to allocate it in the right measure to those who will actually execute the plan. Authority needs to be clearly defined. It also needs to be requisite. In other words, not too much, not too little. Rapid decision-making can be actually achieved by increasing someone's authority. You know, we use a very simple equation to get this idea across, that responsibility without authority leads to frustration, right? And if I'm held accountable to take action, and I'm held accountable to get results, and I don't, and I don't have enough authority to make things happen, I can't help but being frustrated by the whole experience. You've all probably been there when you've been given accountability without enough budget decision-making priorities, for example. And it's very frustrating, and failure is a pretty high probability, not only for me, but for the business. Lack of authority can also lead to a lot of delays. You've all been in the situation, I'm sure, where you're waiting for someone else to make a decision that you're quite capable of making, but for whatever reason, the team leader wants to make that decision. And many times it's not for the right reasons. It causes delays in decision making that ultimately leads in missed deadlines. Okay? So now let's get into some more detail on the subject of defining and granting authority. We're actually going to talk about what it looks like and how we define it. So rather than think of authority as a gradient with an infinite number of degrees, we put it into buckets, right? This kind of keeps it simple while getting the point across. So if we look at the buckets of authority, level 1, and thank you, Nike, this is all about just doing it. And the definition is this: I don't need to consult with the team leader before, nor do I need to advise my team leader afterwards of taking the action or making this. I just do it. Just go ahead and get it done. Level 2 is called tell me after, because in this case, I do need to consult with my after I make the decision, right? This is, and I need to advise my a team leader after I make the decision. This is an obligation and not a courtesy. Level 3 requires that I consult with my team leader before making the decision or taking the action. The decision is still mine, but I need to talk to my team leader before I make the final decision. Level 4 is the lowest. At this level, I have no authority to act or take decisions. My sole purpose is to develop recommendations and suggestions, take them to the team leader, who will then make the decision, which I will then implement. Let's talk about an example. I think that might help clarify this. Let's look at how the authority level idea can make things very clear for an individual who is charged with executing a set of changes at the shop floor level of a manufacturing operation. That person's authorities might look something like this. Okay, so the first line deals with guidelines and policies, and it receives the highest level authority, number 1. This person does not need to consult with or advise a team leader. They can just go ahead and make it happen. The second item gets a level 2. So this is something that the team member can do, but is obligated to inform the team leader after taking the decision. Doesn't have to consult with the team leader before, but after I make that decision or take it, I need to let the team leader know. This makes sense in this particular situation, as changes to the mix of suppliers might be questioned by others in the organization. And the team leader needs to be able to respond without being embarrassed, without saying, well, geez, I didn't know. Finally, due to the significant impact of the fourth item, it has a level 4. The team member can make suggestions, but due to the potential consequences, the team leader will be the one to make the ultimate decision. You know, some authority statements seem almost obvious or understood, but the question is, to who? Are they understood by the person that really needs to take the action, make the decision? You know, sometimes what happens is people go too far. They overstep their authority. You've seen that. And sometimes people kind of sit on the ledge wondering whether should I make that decision or not. Both situations can cause trouble for the organization. I'm sure that you've been in one of those situations somewhere in your career. All this stuff needs to be sorted out way before, you know, made clear and aligned with what should be done. And that needs to be done right up front. I know I've spent a lot of time on authority clarification, but it really is at the root cause of a lot of reasons why things don't get done in organizations, that people are not clear on what they're supposed to do, and they're not clear on the specific authority they have to get things done. Okay, we're going to wrap things up shortly. It's 11:40, but before we head into the home stretch, I want to share a quote from someone who's had a ton of experience in battle planning and getting results. And I'm just going to give you a few seconds to read the quote in full. So this was made by Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was the supreme commander of the Allied forces in the European theater of operations in World War II, and the 34th president of the United States of America. Pretty strong credentials. So in the context of today's situation in RAD, how do we put these words to good use? It's about spending your time adapting and assessing and changing, planning, and especially executing and adapting. Don't get caught up in the beauty of the plan that you lose sight of the sole purpose, which is to get results. Okay, so now we can wrap it up in terms of the value proposition of RAD. Let's just take each word, rapid, because it is all about speed today. This is all about taking months just talking days, not months, short sessions done in quick cadence. It's about optimizing the tools and techniques in your toolkit to optimize efficiency. And again, about making sure people have authority. Those people are closest to the action have the authority that they need. Agility, flexibility is all about short feedback cycles, calling audibles, as Richard mentioned. It's again about making the authorities close to the action. And it's about deployment, because in the final analysis, it's all about getting things done by engaging people and making sure that there's clear ownership, expectations, and authority. So that's sort of the value the proposition for RAD. And if we flip back to how RAD was created, back to the model, back to what we call the GEM model, the great execution of what matters most. We want to get into that top right-hand quadrant, right? And plus speed and agility that we've talked about gives you, in fact, RAD. So if you have clients or friends that feel like this, we've got the solution to help them become more agile, more dexterous, and just make things happen, right? Like the guy on the snowmobile. Okay, let's talk about the price. Everybody wants to know how much, and here's what it is. So the basic RAD package, which includes a survey, the distribution, the analyzing, the summary of the results, working with the core planning team, doing all the orientation, preparing the pre-work, documenting the results, for 6 working sessions, which, as Richard mentioned, are typically 1.5 to 2 hours long. And then 1 deployment checkpoint meeting. Well, we do one to kind of set the frame on how to do a RAD type checkpoint meeting. So the cost to that package is $15,000 to $18,000. The star says that we can actually, this is based on virtual or online, but there are some clients, when I just finished some work with the clients, I still like the idea of getting face-to-face sometimes. So therefore, we can get a spread in cost. The spread also in cost may reflect the number of people, because if we're doing a survey for 250 people versus 3,000 people, the cost can be bumped up a little. But generally speaking, the price is between 15 and 18 grand. And there are some add-ons, so that if in fact the client wants to have us manage their checkpoint meetings and do those every 2 weeks, then there's an additional $5,000 for that. And then if they want us to do an additional RAD cycle, then there's the fees, another $12,000. So you can still, fundamental price is around 15 grand, and then there's some add-ons. So there you have it, in terms of what the cost is. Okay, we've got a couple of minutes left for some Q&A. Not many minutes, it's 11:44 right now. We want to finish up, wrap up in a couple of minutes. Richard, any questions?
Yeah, a couple of questions, Fred.
Good.
The first of those is, can you describe a good referral for the system? Who should we be looking for? So who in particular would be sort of the target client, if you will?
Oh, okay. Well, you know what? The referral needs to could be either someone who is struggling with their situation because of all the COVID things, who has a leader that recognizes that we need some help to get through the process quicker. So either it's an organization that is struggling with low demand but high pressures. That's a pretty good client option. But also, we have another client who says, my business is like trying to drink from a fire hose right now, and I need some help just trying to manage this high demand we've got, right? So I think the criteria are primarily having a team leader that sees the value of doing that, because in our experience, if the team leader is not on deck and really driving the process and leading the process, it can be a big waste of time. So team leader is really important. And then either scenario can create a nice situation for RAD.
Okay, Fred, thanks. Second question, which I think is particularly, to these times that we're experiencing now. For in-person sessions, how are you facilitating while respecting public health directives?
Well, in fact, I just finished a session with a client, and we use a very large conference room. We space people out. It's all the wipe down stuff. It's all of those things, and wearing masks if in fact required. For this particular situation, we're other where we didn't use masks. It just kind of interferes with the flow of conversation. So we just make sure we respect whatever protocols the organization has set up.
Okay, one final question is, do we see this as a replacement for strategic planning, or is this something to complement or supplement it?
Yeah, it's definitely not a replacement for strat planning. Strat planning, now the time frames we're finding for strat planning are shrinking. Again, I was working with a client earlier this week who was using a 3-year time frame, is now saying, I don't know about 3 years. Maybe we should shrink it down to 2 years. So for sure, it's a supplement towards the longer term strat plan. But I got to tell you, there's a lot of things that you could be using out of RAD in the strategic planning process. I mean, a lot of those tools and techniques that we talked about, Spitball decision making, using the ground rules, those are all very applicable and can help increase the effectiveness, efficiency of strategic planning. And you guys have been through this. Sometimes those are long, too long, overdrawn processes that need to be tightened up.
Okay, thanks, Fred. Those are all the questions we have for today.
Okay, good. Thanks for the questions, folks.
Let me just finish us up here by reviewing quickly the goals that we had. The goal for this session, number one, was to position RAD, and particularly to position RAD as a solution which is really relevant in today's environment for business. Secondly, was to gain your confidence in RAD and in Focus as its provider, and to create some follow-up interest in RAD after the webinar. What I'm going to do is launch a poll. It's a short poll. There are 3 questions. And if you would please respond to each of the 3, you'll need to scroll down to, I think, see the 3rd one on your screen. So the first question is, to what degree do you feel the webinar has achieved the goals? Second question then is, how do you feel about the RAD value proposition and pricing? And then finally, how likely are you to recommend Focus and RAD to someone who values your opinion, which might be a client, a colleague, a friend, etc. If you could please take a minute or so and respond to that poll, that would be very helpful to us. By the way, I should mention the poll is anonymous, so we don't know who said what. Okay, that's everyone. I'm going to close the poll now. And finally, thanks once again for being on this webinar with us. We greatly appreciate your time. For those of you who are doing this during your vacation, I don't know what to say. we are deeply appreciative of that. Of course, I would do the same thing, depending on where I was. But at any rate, thanks again so much for being here today. We look forward to connecting again with each of you, and feel free to reach out to us. If you don't have our contact information already, you see it on the screen. Our website, focusmanagement.ca, our sort of intake email, info@focusmanagement.ca, and our phone number as well. So once again, folks, thanks very much, and we look forward to future conversations after this webinar.
Thanks, folks. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.